Hi, I'm poor. While disability benefits in the United States have saved so many low-income disabled people from destitution, most of these programs come with stipulations that keep those same people in poverty, preventing them from even dreaming of transcending their circumstances. These stipulations greatly contribute to the lower quality of life for disabled people, in addition to having a disabling condition and being pushed to the outskirts by an unaccommodating society. It's assumed that disabled people don't inherently deserve support for their basic human needs because they aren't productive or useful to capitalism. While you can easily find discussions of disability rights in online bubbles on Twitter, Facebook, and other social media platforms, the average person seems sadly ignorant of what disabled people go through on a daily basis and the systemic barriers that keep us in poverty. Here are some of the barriers that prevent disabled people from thriving. Number 1. Social stigma. Prejudice towards welfare recipients is unfortunately common. Those on government benefits are often viewed through a disdainful lens, as they are assumed to either be fraudsters abusing the system or lazy people leeching off the finite resources funded by hardworking taxpayers. This prejudice didn't just come out of nowhere. The term welfare queen became a stereotype after Ronald Reagan's campaign speech in 1976, where he pointed out an absurd case of fraud to rally support for welfare reform. It was the genuine case of Linda Taylor, a woman who committed many crimes, operated under multiple aliases, and owned several cars, including a Cadillac, while committing welfare fraud. While Reagan exaggerated Taylor's story in his speech, suggesting her income was $150,000 a year and that the fraud she committed was estimated at $1 million, the actual estimation of her welfare fraud was around $40,000. While Linda Taylor herself has largely been forgotten, the welfare queen stereotype lives on in political discourse, stigmatizing welfare recipients. In particular, this term was intended to paint a picture of Black single mothers living in luxury at the expense of taxpayers. This does nothing to help our current issues of racism in America, especially regarding low-income Black Americans. In addition, these stereotypes can create a false narrative that welfare programs are rife with fraud, when the actual numbers are much lower. For example, only 1% of food stamps recipients were found to be ineligible for benefits. These stereotypes also show a severe misunderstanding of welfare recipients as a whole, deeming them as lazy without really knowing who they are or their circumstances. Most people I know on welfare, even if they are disabled or elderly, like staying busy and productive. They want to be productive members of this society. And statistics reflect this. A survey done by the Cato Institute shows that most welfare recipients would rather earn their own living. Negative attitudes about welfare recipients contribute to bad policies and unnecessary barriers that make obtaining and keeping benefits more difficult. For example, the TANF program, or Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, which provides cash assistance for low-income families with children, requires recipients to work and cuts them off if they have any more children. One of the main intentions of this program is to, quote-unquote, end the dependence of needy parents on government benefits by promoting job preparation, work, and marriage, end quote. And penalties for having children could be due to the stereotype of welfare recipients popping out babies to get more benefits, when in reality, having more children does not always equal more benefits. And logically, the cost of caring for a child would far outweigh any benefit increase that someone could get, if any. It makes more sense to assume more complex reasons why a low-income family might have more children. For example, lack of contraceptive access, or sex education, or cultural differences. There are also work requirements associated with different benefits programs. For example, able-bodied people who receive food stamps, also known as SNAP or EBT benefits, are also required to work a minimum of 30 hours a week in order to receive food assistance. These rules seem aligned with the idea that welfare recipients are lazy and should work, and those who do not work don't deserve support. Work requirements for welfare seems particularly problematic for disabled recipients or single parents who may not be able to work due to needing to care for their children. They also don't account for situational or systemic barriers to work, like lack of available jobs, hours being cut, or discrimination, making it difficult to obtain or keep a job. The rules of many of these benefit programs are out of touch with the actual needs and circumstances of recipients, and instead impose requirements that appease public perceptions of people on welfare. These rules seem steeped in the pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality, not understanding that many of these recipients don't even have metaphorical bootstraps. Studies have shown that welfare stigma has deterred many people from applying for benefits, even if they are eligible and very much need the support. As a personal anecdote, a disabled friend of mine grew up with anti-welfare sentiments from their family, despite their poverty, which influenced my friend to carry on that stigma and avoid any support that is available. And this is in addition to the labor-intensive burdens involved in applying for benefits, which by itself can be a huge deterrent and has been for many of my friends who very much needed benefits but have been unable to get them due to these burdens. Like gathering paperwork, seeing doctors, playing phone tag with multiple agencies, and potentially losing time, sleep, and income to be present for multiple interviews and meetings, most of which have specific dates and times that cannot be negotiated. Stigma can also negatively affect the health of people on welfare. According to a study from the National Library of Medicine, the stigmatizing nature of the US welfare system is of particular importance, not only because it has shown to deter eligible applicants from participating in public assistance programs despite facing economic hardship, but also because welfare stigma is linked to several adverse mental health effects, including depression, impaired feelings of self-worth, diminished well-being, low self-esteem, anxiety, and From personal experience, it's not too difficult to come across hateful comments online about welfare recipients being leeches or burdens, and that because we can't fend for ourselves, we should be left to die. Darwinism, or survival of the fittest, if you will. And I've got some of these comments on my videos before. These kinds of comments can not only ruin your day, but exposure to these societal attitudes over time can really chip away at your self-worth and mental health, especially if you're already worn down from just trying to survive. And what most people who hold these attitudes probably don't realize is that people on welfare are usually disabled, seniors, single-parent households, and children. Why the heck would you want these people who clearly need support to not have it? Maybe you just don't give a crap about them because you're not in those demographics. So, not your problem, right? But even if you aren't in those demographics, you might very well end up on welfare someday. You could become unemployed and need unemployment benefits and food stamps to keep you afloat while you find new work. American capitalism in particular can be pretty brutal in the sense that it's really quite easy to fall into this circumstance. Most workers in the United States are balanced precariously on a fragile foundation that can crack and collapse as soon as something changes, whether it be a sudden loss of employment, having children, becoming severely ill, or dealing with family emergencies. Employment in the US does not come with a robust safety net compared to other countries like the UK, where there's not only universal healthcare, but a generous amount of paid time off to fall back on should something come up. So it doesn't make sense to me to demonize what little safety nets do exist in the US, because honestly, without them, we'd be much worse off than we already are. We would be screwed! That being said, anyone can become disabled at any point. You could end up like me. And everyone becomes elderly if they live long enough. So take that into consideration when debating whether or not welfare should exist. My hope is that stigma around welfare will decrease over time, and I honestly believe that it could. So many Americans during the 2020 crisis increasingly faced issues like unemployment, and many had to navigate the welfare system for the first time. Many were becoming disabled due to the events happening at that time. Many have also had their overall perspectives on work challenged. People have been waking up to the reality that they are overworked and underpaid, and questioning why they have to grind so hard just to make ends meet. And while wages have thankfully increased in the past few years in response to inflation, I hope that no one forgets the struggle that we've been through in 2020, because it's what so many low-income and disabled Americans face every single day. We can't simply cast aside the most vulnerable people in our society just because things are going back to normal for the average person. Perhaps our collective experiences from the past few years could increase public support for having a more robust safety net, like increasing access to basic healthcare and reforming the welfare system in a way that genuinely helps people out of poverty, rather than simply cutting the programs and leaving almost 20% of our population in the dust. 20%. That's how many people are on welfare as of 2023, in case you didn't know. While welfare stigma alone can be a huge deterrent from applying for benefits, even if you genuinely need them, we're only just scratching the surface of the barriers that people face in accessing social supports. Number 2, the application process. Applying for benefits is a long, grueling, invasive process that even an able-bodied person would struggle with, especially for disability benefits such as SSI, or Supplemental Security Income, and SSDI, or Social Security Disability Insurance. There are 3 stages to applying for SSI or SSDI: the initial application, the appeal, and the hearing. The initial application is where most people hit a roadblock. Most people are denied the first time, sometimes multiple times, even if they 100% should qualify. According to Atticus Law Firm, an average of only 22% of initial applications are accepted by the Social Security Administration, also known as the SSA. That's about 1 in every 5 applicants. The high number of denials are usually due to multiple factors, like missing paperwork, missed deadlines, and having too much income or savings to qualify, which, to be honest, is really easy to exceed, considering the abysmally low income cap of $914 a month for SSI. Most disability cases are rather complex and require a lot of paperwork and information to prove that they are disabled. This information could be difficult to obtain if they can't afford doctor visits or fees to obtain medical records, and the nature of their disability could make it difficult to get to the doctor's office in the first place. The medical system in general can be especially unfriendly towards disabled people of color and those who are multiply marginalized, so people in those groups may have a harder time accessing proper diagnosis and paperwork needed to prove disability. It's also harder to get approved for benefits if you are older, employed, and never received a diagnosis or support for your disability. Even if you did receive support, say as a child, it might be difficult to access that paperwork many years later as an adult. The fact that the SSA requires a heavy paper trail to prove disability is a huge roadblock for many applicants. And if you're employed, as a disabled person, you may not have any time or energy left to even go through the process of obtaining a diagnosis or other required paperwork. Applying for disability benefits can be extremely stressful on individuals who are already suffering from being disabled. This process can be burdensome even on non-disabled loved ones applying on someone else's behalf. Parents and family members of some of my disabled friends who applied on their behalf have told me that even they struggled with the process as an able-bodied person, and they thought it was ridiculous and overly extensive. There is a huge administrative burden placed on these individuals. Quoting a helpful video titled, "How the Social Safety Net is Failing Disabled People," some SSD applicants are asked to provide over 1,000 pages of medical records, and many have to hire a lawyer to apply or appeal the convoluted process. You heard that right. To reduce the possibility of being denied, it's recommended to get a lawyer, or more accurately, a disability attorney, to assist with the application process. How many government assistance programs can you think of that require a lawyer to apply for? Luckily, there are disability attorneys who can help your case, regardless of your ability to pay, and they won't be paid unless you win your benefits, so they are highly incentivized to genuinely help your case. Still, the fact that it's nearly impossible to get on benefits without the help of an attorney is a roadblock for disabled people who may not even be aware that help is available. It's all too common for a disabled applicant to apply without help, to put all that work into filing out paperwork, seeing doctors, and gathering medical records, only to be denied, which can be soul-crushing and deter the applicant from trying again. To add insult to injury, applicants often wait a long time before even hearing back about whether they were approved or denied. As of 2023, new applicants have waited an average of 7 months just to hear back about their approval from the initial application process. They receive no benefits from the SSA during this time. Imagine going 7 months being completely unable to work and pay the bills. Imagine you have no other safety net, no loved ones stepping in to support you financially or house you during this time. 7 months may not seem that bad in the long run, but it could be absolute hell for the disabled and elderly people in these circumstances. If they were denied and decide to appeal, they would have to wait, on average, another 2 years before they can get a hearing. Again, they receive no benefits during this process. 7 months is a long time to go without support. Now imagine waiting almost 3 years. I also know people who have waited much longer due to being denied multiple times. For some, it took them 7 to 10 years to finally be approved. This waiting time can be life or death, or at least leave some worse off than before. It's estimated that each year, while waiting on a decision about their disability benefits, 8,000 applicants file for bankruptcy, while another 10,000 people die from waiting. There are multiple reasons the application process takes so long. For starters, there are often a huge number of applications and not enough government workers available to meet the demand. It's estimated that in 2018, there were 2 million applications, equating to 40,000 people per week, or 5,700 people per day. In addition, there are only 1,600 administrative law judges available to oversee these cases. Luckily, there are other benefit programs that can help fill the gap, like Medicaid and food stamps, also known as EBT or SNAP benefits. They don't usually take as long to get as SSI or SSDI, but they still come with lengthy applications with invasive questions and require a lot of paperwork. Not to mention the narrow hoops applicants must jump through, in addition to mistakes on paperwork, which can delay your access to these programs when you need it the most. Clerical errors on the government's end are not uncommon, which can further delay your case. As of writing this part of the script, a friend of mine was waiting months to be approved for Medicaid coverage after moving across states. They should qualify as they did before, since their disability and financial circumstances haven't changed beyond moving. They reapplied for Medicaid right away, and after almost 2 months of waiting, they were denied. The reason cited is, "You are not a qualifying group," despite the fact that they are in a qualifying group, specifically being an SSI recipient, which is information the government can easily look up themselves. They had to provide all the paperwork requested, and an appeal had to be filed, and yet they had to wait even longer than 2 months due to an error on the government's end. This was really worrying at the time, since they couldn't receive the medical care they really needed. They couldn't afford medical costs out of pocket, which is the whole point of needing to be on Medicaid. Even if you do manage to get on disability benefits, it's not an easy road ahead. The administrative burden on SSI applicants doesn't stop at the application process. There are a number of restrictions and rules that recipients must follow in order to keep their benefits, and these rules dictate many aspects of a disabled person's life, from how much money they can have, to how much they can work, to whether or not they can even get married. Some of these rules are considered to be outdated and unnecessarily cruel, and from my experience, have an all-encompassing, anxiety-inducing impact on myself and other disabled people. Number 3, forced poverty. The rules for keeping disability benefits seem designed to keep you in poverty, especially for those who are only on SSI. For starters, you aren't allowed to have any more than $2,000 in savings and assets. And you aren't allowed to earn income over what's called substantial gainful activity, or SGA, which as of 2023 is $1,470 a month. However, for those on SSI, it's recommended to avoid making any more than $914 a month in income, as this puts you at risk of losing your benefits. $914 is less than minimum wage, and we all know by now that minimum wage is still not livable. And in addition, if you receive any monetary support from friends or family, including free housing or food, you must report these facts, and they will likely result in reductions to your benefits. If you are married, your spouse's income is counted as monetary support, regardless of whether you share finances or not. So, if you are married to an able-bodied person who's making minimum wage, you may not qualify for any disability benefits. As such, people who need these benefits often choose not to get married, or they get a divorce before applying for benefits so their marital status won't hurt their chances. In some cases, even quote-unquote living as married, meaning being in a relationship and living in the same household as that person, can also disqualify you. It depends on what state you live in, but this does apply in some cases. And this is regardless of whether you actually share finances. Remember when I mentioned monetary support from others? The SSA calls this in-kind support. So things like food, housing, or cash gifts from others could hurt your benefits, even if it's a temporary situation to help you stay afloat until you can get benefits. The limit on assets you can own also restricts your ability to invest money, making it difficult to accrue wealth of any kind, or even receive money that you rightfully deserve, like compensation from legal cases like an injury lawsuit or inheritance money. These limitations are requirements for the entirety of the application process, which, as I've mentioned, takes an average of 3 years to complete. And even after approval, these requirements continue indefinitely for as long as you're on disability benefits. While these restrictions make obtaining and living off of disability benefits challenging, I want to mention a very important resource that could be helpful to some people. The ABLE program, an acronym meaning Achieving a Better Life Experience, offers financial accounts that allow disabled people to have over $2,000 in savings with no penalties to their SSI. It's also useful to have while applying for benefits since it won't hurt your eligibility. I'll talk more about ABLE accounts near the end of this video, so keep watching. Another important thing to mention is that SSDI, or Social Security Disability Insurance, is generally more ideal compared to SSI since it has less income restrictions, but it's often harder to get since it requires you to have a certain number of work credits. The only people who would qualify for SSDI are workers who have paid into the system, meaning that if you're disabled from birth and can't work at all, your only option is SSI, though there are some exceptions to this. So people who are born disabled, who are the most disabled by society standards for being literally unable to work, do not qualify for Social Security disability, which is extremely ironic. So the ones who are the most disabled by no fault of their own face the most restrictions, deductions for making or receiving any money at all, and basically being punished for trying to improve their circumstances. Even without restrictions and deductions, most disability benefits are absolutely not enough to live on in the current US economy. As of 2023, the maximum SSI benefit of $914 per month is still less than minimum wage, and nowhere near enough to cover rent alone in most places. And that's the maximum that you can get. The average SSI recipient, according to the Social Security Administration, gets about $675 a month. So not even the full amount. On the other hand, SSDI recipients can receive more, around $3,627 per month maximum. But like with SSI, that is the maximum and not the average. The average amount SSDI recipients receive is $1,358 per month. Disability benefits in the USA do not keep up with inflation, meaning recipients sink further into poverty each year, decreasing their already poor quality of life. Annual increases to SSI, also known as COLA or cost of living adjustments, have been unfortunately lacking. And while 2023 had an 8.7% increase in the cost of living adjustment, which is the largest adjustment since 1981, the maximum SSI amount right now is still below the federal poverty line. To be considered at the federal poverty line, you need to be making $1,215 per month, which is $300 more than the maximum SSI. According to the US Census Bureau, the median net worth of SSI recipient households is only $3,025, as opposed to the average household, which is $118,200. That is quite a big difference. Can I have some of that money, please? Thank you. Taking housing into consideration, income even at the poverty level isn't enough to cover the average cost of rent in the United States, which as of 2023 is around $1,700 a month. And on average, in all the places I've lived, the cheapest rent I've come across in housing searches has still been over $1,000. As you probably know, the housing market has been awful for a long time, and no one can afford housing. It's ridiculous. Rents are skyrocketing, and there aren't enough regulations to keep housing affordable. I've also noticed in my housing searches that many apartment complexes require your monthly income to be 2 to 3 times the rent. And considering that the cheapest rent I've found anywhere in the last 3 years was $750 a month, 2 times that amount would be an income of $1,500 per month. That essentially gatekeeps all people on disability benefits who can't work from securing housing if they're only relying on their own income. And this is ironic, considering that landlords legally cannot discriminate based on protected characteristics like race or disability. That income requirement, though perhaps indirectly, seems very discriminatory to me. And personally, this doesn't make much sense, since those on disability benefits have a guaranteed source of income, which you'd think landlords would appreciate. Housing options for disabled people are either non-existent, inaccessible, or not very good. When I was searching for housing for autistic people in my area, I came across what looked like a great program that provides shared, independent, long-term housing for people with autism and intellectual disabilities. But dating, as in having romantic or relationships, is explicitly prohibited in their community. That is a straight up human rights violation, and I did not want to give up my ability to have relationships for the rest of my life just to secure supportive housing. That's ridiculous. I mean, would you give up your ability to date people in order to get housing? I mean, maybe if you're asexual or aromantic, that won't be a problem, but like most people, they're gonna have a problem with that. Pretty sure. But I digress. This is getting kind of depressing, so let's look at this cute video of my dog that I took a few years ago. See me. See me. See me. There are other options to help low-income and disabled people obtain housing, but they're extremely limited or difficult to get and often have lengthy wait times. Even getting on a wait list for Section 8 housing in the first place has been a huge challenge for me. As a disabled person, I would normally have priority in these kinds of programs, but anytime I've looked into it, every single wait list has been closed, and often for many years. Even if I manage to get on a wait list and eventually secure affordable housing, the housing that's available isn't always the best. It may not be in a safe area, or it's in the middle of nowhere, or the housing itself may not be very accessible. I've definitely noticed that places with low rent tend to lack amenities that disabled people might rely on, like wheelchair ramps, or handlebars in the bathroom, or a dishwasher. And I'm gonna go a bit on a rant here, a little side tangent. So I spent most of my adult life without a dishwasher. Things like dishwashers, garbage disposals, and washers and dryers even are considered a luxury reserved for the middle class. My parents are middle class, so I did grow up with having these as a child, but as an adult, I'm very much not middle class, so I didn't have a dishwasher or garbage disposal since I was about 17 years old. I'm 32 now. I do have an apartment with a dishwasher for the first time in 14 years, and holy heck, it helps me so much. Having to hand wash dishes for so many years has seriously contributed to my disabilities and not functioning. I have physical and mental disabilities that make it painful or an all-day ordeal to hand wash dishes. I also went a few months on and off without access to a washer and dryer, and let me tell you, hand washing and drying a full load of laundry is extremely backbreaking, especially if you're disabled. I tried all kinds of weird hacks to make it easier, but nothing helped as much as just having a washer and dryer. We seriously take our modern conveniences for granted, and as a disabled person, they can make a night and day difference in our ability to function. So tell me, how does it make sense to give the disabled people the worst housing available without these assistive devices, which is what they are? They're assistive devices, and just assume that they're going to be fine, when in reality, it's likely much more costly than just providing them with what they need, since not having access to suitable housing or assistive devices can worsen our health and increase how much medical care we need, which honestly just further burdens the system if you think about it.
Just give me my human rights.
So the question is, with low disability benefits and high cost of living, how on earth does a disabled person afford the basics, especially housing? Well, one potential solution for those of us who can still somewhat work is to get a job to compensate, right? After all, the program incentivizes work, right? And it advertises this fact. Number 4, punishment for working. Oh! I have hands! Anyway, the reality is that the SSI program does not incentivize work. In fact, it punishes you for working. The program seems to be set up to kick you off benefits eventually in hopes that you'll be able to return to work full time and sustain this work just like an able-bodied person would.
This next part has a lot of math. I tried to keep it concise, but please just bear with me here. It's necessary to understand just how risky it is for a disabled person to work.
They deduct your benefits based on income you make from work. The deductions themselves are about half of what you make, not including the first $85 that you make in a month, give or take. These amounts can vary depending on the situation. So if you make $200 at work, minus $85, your countable income would be $115. Half of that is $57.50. So that's what they would deduct from your benefits. Taking this deduction into account, your take-home pay before taxes would be $142.50. So when you think about it, I mean, you still have an extra $142 in addition to your benefits, right? That's not too bad, right? But that's not all. We have to account for taxes. Like any other worker, disabled people must pay taxes on their wages if they work. While taxes can vary from person to person, let's use the rate of 10% to do some calculations, since 10% tax rate is usually applied to people who make around $10,000 a year or less. Let's say you make $200 in gross wages per month.
Gross meaning you're disgusting and you should be ashamed of yourself. Just kidding. Gross means before taxes.
And after taxes, the money you take home is $180. Gross income is also the amount the Social Security Administration uses while calculating deductions. So in this scenario, you made $200 according to the SSA. After deductions plus taxes, your take-home pay of $200 of work is actually only $122.50. So technically, you as a disabled person are making less money than everyone else in the same job for the same amount of work. Because for able-bodied people who work, the SSA isn't adding additional deductions to their income beyond taxes. Now, I can picture people right now commenting, suggesting, oh, disabled people deserve to make less money because their work is worth less anyway. Maybe due to working slower than others or at lesser quality, but honestly, every disabled person I know, provided they have a job suitable for their skills or that accommodates for their disability, they work just as hard, if not harder, than able-bodied people with the same results. They might just choose to have less hours so they can preserve their energy, or they'd work full-time anyway at the expense of their health. So we can't really justify paying them less for the same work because they're doing the work as well as anyone else is.
I know there are exceptions to this, but I don't think that we should make the same assumption about all disabled workers and then apply restrictions on them based on this assumption.
Deductions to your disability benefits can also make your finances unpredictable because they take a few months to kick in. So if, for example, you make $200 in January, you might not see a deduction based on that amount until about April or May. So let's say April comes around and your income is $0 for that month because you spent it recovering from the previous months of work. That extra $200 that you made in January, probably long gone by now, especially if you had a surprise medical expense or even just regular bills.
Taking into account both the SSI deduction and work taxes, you now have $77.50 less income than you would have gotten had you not worked in January. How are you going to pay rent and bills?
I'm just imagining people in the comments saying, oh, you just need to plan better. To those people, you've probably never been poor or disabled before. You literally cannot predict what kind of expenses will pop up. It's expensive being disabled. Imagine you have a bad month where your disability flares up, you lose the ability to cook food at home. You have no close friends, no relatives to help you out, so you have no choice but to order takeout or delivery, which is much, much more expensive than just cooking at home. Imagine you have a medical emergency and have to cover an expensive hospital bill. Not to mention, it's not all that uncommon to lose SSI benefits, medical coverage, or food stamps for the most ridiculous reasons, including mistakes, technical errors, or outright negligence on the government's end. More on that later. Even though many disabled people work hard at their jobs, so many have conditions that would make working full-time dangerous for their health, even if they can technically work. The cost of worsening health is like any other deduction on top of others, adding insult to injury, or rather, injury to insult. So when disabled people choose not to work, the risk to their health is probably another consideration. One way disabled people try to preserve their own health while still being productive members of society is to be self-employed. If they can decide their own hours and how to run their business, they can work around their disability, rather than trying to fit themselves into a typical workplace that won't accommodate to them. Things like working from home, selling crafts on Etsy, being a content creator, writing novels, things like this can be viable careers for disabled people. From my experience, content creation has provided me with a sense of purpose that keeps my brain occupied, at least while I'm functioning enough to make content. But pursuing that for money has proven to be rather complicated. For one, reporting self-employment income has a lot more steps compared to with traditional employment. Most people on disability benefits who work for an employer can report their income online or over the phone through an automated system. If you're self-employed, however, the only option for reporting as of now is by mail. You have to make copies or print out pay stubs and mail them to the SSA before the 10th of every month. So if you don't have a printer, can't afford to make copies, or can't afford the postage, you're kinda screwed. Regarding taxes, self-employment as a whole makes paying taxes a little bit more work. Taxes are not automatically deducted from your paycheck, so you have to keep careful track of how much you make, your business expenses, and your hours, and other information that's required when you do pay taxes. Something that was previously a saving grace for a lot of self-employed people was the fact that they wouldn't receive a tax form until they made $20,000 in a year, or 200 transactions, whichever came first. But in 2022, that amount changed to only $600, which in my opinion is abysmally low. So even if you've just made a few $100s over the course of a year doing a side gig like Uber or selling crafts, you're gonna have to pay self-employment tax on that income. It also doesn't help that taxes for self-employment are higher when compared to traditional employment, with a rate around 15%. This is because you don't have an employer, so you are paying taxes as not only the worker, but as the employer. Considering that more disabled people are self-employed compared to the general population, they often endure these additional financial burdens. Reasons like these have discouraged me from pursuing career ideas for a long time. I've had countless business ideas, some of which could actually be viable for me, that I could do on my own time when I'm functioning well. I love the idea of making more content online, improving the quality and getting more views. I also like the idea of hand-making cute and crafty things to sell. But I've had to give up and purposefully lessen my activity when faced with the potential of losing my benefits that I rely on to live. Honestly, it's utterly crushing. I worry not only about losing SSI, but also about losing Medicaid, which if I didn't have, I couldn't get my medications or the care that I need in order to function. My OCD would get worse, I might become unalivey, my chronic pain would become unbearable because I wouldn't be able to go to the chiropractor or get physical therapy, and should there be a medical emergency, I'd end up in debt because I can't afford an emergency room bill. And I certainly can't afford typical health insurance, so that is not an option. I mean, have you seen those deductibles? Seriously? This is why, honestly, we should just have universal healthcare. While I don't want to get into the politics of all that, I think many people watching would agree with me that people should be able to access the most basic healthcare, especially if without it, they wouldn't be able to survive. The system just isn't set up in a way that accommodates for people with fluctuating levels of functioning. It seems to assume that either you're 100% disabled and will only give you support in that circumstance, or that you're 100% able-bodied and can work full-time. If you're somewhere in between, you're punished no matter what you do. You could resign yourself to not working and just keep yourself busy with hobbies, but you might not be able to afford basic living expenses. Or you could try to work full-time so you don't have to rely on benefits. But then your health might decline to a point where you'd be worse off than you were before. So it's a case of damned if you do, damned if you don't. At the very least, if the SSA did away with deductions to benefits or made them less restrictive, more disabled people would be working, or working more. Even if they have to pay taxes, not having additional deductions would ensure that they aren't going to screw themselves over by trying to be more productive. Another factor, bureaucratic red tape. If you work while on benefits, you must report your income religiously each month. You must report all income, earned or unearned, including cash gifts or money that you'd make from odd jobs or self-employment, no matter how small the amount. And there are penalties for failing to report your income. But ironically, even if you do report your income, there is a possibility that the Social Security Administration will make a mistake in their calculations at some point, screwing you over. I'll use one of my own experiences as an example. Like I mentioned earlier, the SSA doesn't count the first $85 that you make in a month as income. That amount for me is $65 because I get Medicare. But they've deducted from my SSI even when I've made less than that amount, which they're not supposed to do. Back when I was in college, one of my professors was looking to hire someone for a small odd job, namely interviewing international students about their experience at my college. It was a paid job, but it was only $25. They had me fill out a W-2 tax form since they legally could not pay me unless I did. Unfortunately, this tipped off the SSA that I had made some money, and they proceeded to deduct $25 from my SSI benefits. This amount was not correct, but they didn't bother to apply the right calculations, so I essentially just did a paid job for free. And that was a lot of stress, just for $25. Okay, time to be honest and intimate with you. No, just kidding. So, financial stuff. A while back, I was making an average of anywhere between $50 and $80 per month from my content creation online. I reported this income accurately every month. Remember how I mentioned mistakes, technical errors, and negligence on the government's end? I had received a letter from the SSA stating that they would be deducting $30 a month from my SSI starting September of that year. Even if I had a good month and I made $85, which is above my $65 threshold,
Only $20 of that income was countable.
and since deductions would only be half of my income, the total that they should have deducted would be only $10, not $30. I'd gone to the office in person to challenge them on this, bringing them printouts of my pay stubs and expenses for the entire year. They said they would resolve the issue, yet I still got this letter in the mail. I had to go to the office a second time to challenge it, which I was willing to do, but the whole process of appealing for them to fix this mistake, their mistake, mind you, was completely soul-sucking. When I was still recovering from the first time I challenged it, I had to go and do it all over again. There's a good chance that I will never be refunded for those incorrect deductions. Rather, they would just correct the amount going forward and pretend that they didn't wrongfully take my money. And this kind of thing happens all the time to SSI recipients, not just me, and it's honestly completely absurd. The sad part of this is that even if the SSA did respect their rule about not touching the first $65 to $85 of people's income, that amount has not changed in years, and it doesn't keep up with inflation. So SSI recipients are being penalized for making pathetically small amounts of money by today's standards. Low income reporting thresholds, in addition to all the other bureaucratic red tape, needlessly complicates the lives of disabled people on benefits. Aside from the cruelty of punishing a disabled person for making literal pennies, I wonder if from a financial perspective, if the cost of all this red tape outweighs the few dollars that it might save the government. It takes a lot of time and effort and paid workers to process all this information. Is it really worth it? Especially in cases where the recipients are making so little that the deductions won't be enough to compensate government workers for their time? Still, the Social Security Administration gives the illusion that they incentivize benefit recipients to work. They offer programs for SSDI recipients like Ticket to Work or a trial work period, which lets you earn over the income limit for 9 months. However, after those 9 months have passed, your benefits will be discontinued. While this program might help some folks with a temporary disability transitioning back into the workforce, it's not an ideal solution for those who are permanently disabled, even if they can work just a little bit. Those with fluctuating conditions are likely not considered in programs like these. Just because you function enough to work sometimes doesn't mean you magically become able-bodied and can maintain that forever. Navigating these convoluted systems and rules around work is enough to make anyone's head spin. But as disabled people, we've already got our hands full when it comes to simply managing ourselves and our needs.
Alright, time for some much-needed comic relief.
Ahem.
Autism.
Number 5. Disability itself. It boggles my mind that we're burdened with more red tape and hoops to jump through than the average person to receive support that we rightfully deserve, in addition to the burden of just being disabled. People who assume that welfare recipients are lazy probably aren't aware not only of these administrative burdens, but also what it's like just being disabled. Disability itself can be like a full-time job. Basic things like self-care and other daily tasks can take more effort, energy, and time for a disabled person. An analogy from the disabled community to help people understand this is called the spoon theory, coined by Christine Miserandino, a writer with lupus. Spoon theory suggests that a disabled person starts with a certain number of hypothetical spoons, representing energy that it takes to do certain tasks. These tasks could be like walking, showering, lifting heavy objects, social interaction, and mental tasks. Each of these tasks take up a certain number of spoons, depending on the person. This theory isn't just applicable to physical disability, but psychological or developmental conditions as well. A lot of neurodivergent people, like those with autism and ADHD, also use spoon theory since aspects of neurodivergency can impact one's energy. A lot of us struggle with executive dysfunction, sensory overload, social fatigue, and other issues. It's also very common for neurodivergent people to have multiple co-occurring conditions, like a mental illness or physical disability that can compound our issues with functioning. In my case, I'm autistic. I have multiple mental health conditions and chronic pain. All of these together can make certain tasks very difficult for me. For example, I struggle with hand washing dishes, driving regularly since sleep issues and burnout can make it unsafe for me to drive at times, maintaining a sleep schedule since it takes energy just for me to do my bedtime routine. I'm also on medications that make me sleep too much, so that also contributes. Doing physically demanding tasks like pushing a vacuum and lifting heavy objects. Trouble concentrating, which makes mental tasks take much more longer than they should. Processing information, limiting how much I can understand or read or listen actively. Social fatigue, making any task involving other people very energetically costly, whether it is phone calls, appointments, or even fun social events. Starting, stopping, or switching tasks. It's kind of like rolling a boulder up one side of a hill and then down the other side. It can take me a long time just to get my brain to latch onto the task enough to mentally process like what I'm doing, which would be rolling it up the hill. But once I've really started, it's like the boulder starts rolling down the hill, and the momentum makes it very hard to stop it. Switching tasks is difficult because this process needs to happen for basically every task that I do, which can cause a lot of mental fatigue. As you can probably guess, these issues make it very difficult for me to maintain any kind of employment. I struggle to even get to medical appointments and run errands, especially on days when I didn't get enough sleep or I'm too burned out to drive. When I was a kid in school, I simply just couldn't handle a typical school week. My mom fought for me to have accommodations, like going home early every day and not being assigned homework, since by the time I got home, I just couldn't function at all. As an adult, when I was in a transition program for young adults with developmental disabilities, it was similar to a school week in the sense that they had different programs every day for 6 hours a day. I had to skip a day every week to avoid burning out. They also had a work internship aspect of the program, and I couldn't handle that either because the jobs that they would offer were either too physically demanding for me or just complete sensory overload. When I graduated after 4 years of university, I had to spend another 4 years just recovering from the burnout. To this day, I haven't been able to actually really use my degree in any professional sense beyond doing YouTube since my disabilities make me unable to work in a traditional job setting. And this is just the societal part of my disabilities. On an internal level, just trying to manage and improve myself is a lot of work. I've spent many years working through trauma, learning methods to calm my nervous system, and trying all kinds of medical treatments and therapies to help my mind and body function better. That being said, it absolutely boggles my mind that people like me are put through hell in order to get the very basic support that we need. And I honestly feel so angry on behalf of my friends who have been dealt a much worse hand than me, whether it be from their disabilities or their circumstances, and they still can't get basic support. Disability benefits are a crucial support, and I'm honestly glad that they exist. But the barriers and the downsides that I've touched on so far make these supports incredibly difficult to access and to maintain, which is why I made this video. I want to increase awareness of these intricacies, since I think the average American is unaware of what we actually go through. It's not easy money, and people who get benefits aren't just living it up. We're subjected to restrictive rules that severely limit our independence, and we're not incentivized to work, but rather punished for it. And I'm not the only one dealing with this. I found a Reddit thread that's full of other people on SSI echoing similar anxieties and stories. I'll read some of them for you. When my father left my family, we spent 5 years trying to get my sister on SSI. After 4 years of denial, even though her developmental delay is congenital, we finally convinced the court system that it was necessary for her to live. She had been working a job picking up trash at a local theme park for almost a decade. I drove her to and from work every day. It was a display of independence for her. When she started SSI, they denied her benefits until her bank account reduced to $2,000 because she wasn't allowed to have a net worth above that. Now she can't feasibly perform that job because it isn't a net benefit to her and is a net deficit on her family. And this is on top of the fact that Medicare requires that she only get 1 month of prescriptions at a time and continue getting pre-authorizations for a disease that cannot be cured. None of it makes any sense whatsoever. Real human shit. It's not just the income limitations that are an issue. When someone on disability decides to work part-time just to have some sort of feeling of being productive, Social Security comes in demanding pay stubs weekly. And if that's not enough to scare you from doing a little bit of work for a small amount of money, they then begin to hound you with constant case reviews, scaring you away from any kind of work in society at all. It can take years, and you can lose everything you have when you have to file for disability, and they know people don't want to risk going through that again. So people just give up on trying to normalize their life with a disability. It's a depressing, anxiety-filled existence. It's easier to stay home. Even if you stay under the limit that they set in place, they see it as gainfully working, so they put you under a microscope. It's a big risk to take, and unfortunately for a lot of people in that situation,
Working just even a small amount is a huge boost to self-esteem and mental well-being, but Social Security will stick it to you for just trying to feel like a human being.
here's another one. If you're disabled, working anything beyond a minimum wage job at part-time will disqualify you from receiving benefits. And those benefits could be $50,000 in medications or medical care. This isn't stuck between a rock and a hard place. This is literally telling people to just die of health or die of lack of purpose. And here's the last one. Everybody keeps asking me why I didn't apply for disability. Because I own a car and I'm married on paper. The reason is I'm still married because I need his benefits. Regardless of that, blocking me from getting married and owning a vehicle is ridiculous. They act like disabled folks are trying to scam something. I'm just trying to exist. In 5 years, once my alimony comes to an end, I'm going to be homeless because I have no way of making income at this point. I was already sick and disabled. Then I got COVID twice and had surgery which led to stroke. Now I'm even more crippled. I can't think, I can't talk normal, I can't walk. I'm already chronically in pain. I'm fucked. I'm sorry, this one hit me hard and I'm scared on how I'm going to survive. I'm struggling to exist as is. I'll put a link to this thread in the description in case you want to read more. I personally felt emotional reading it, but also validated knowing that I'm not the only one experiencing this. Despite everything, I do realize in a way that I'm lucky. I was born into a middle-class family, I always had a roof over my head, and parents who were willing to understand and accommodate to me being autistic. They are the sole reason why I'm not homeless as an adult, and why I was able to get on disability benefits in the first place. I honestly don't think that I would have the capacity to even go through the application process by myself if I didn't have a support system to help me. To be clear, I'm probably an exception to the rule. Most disabled people I know were born into lower-income households that were either unsafe, overwhelming, or crowded with no privacy. Most of them haven't had the capacity to apply for disability benefits, and those who have tried gave up because they were denied, despite clearly meeting the criteria. The combination of circumstances that disable them even more, plus just not having any kind of support, including financial, has me genuinely worried and stressed on their behalf because I'm vividly aware of how fragile that kind of situation is, and because of how quickly it can go downhill. When my friends have gone through this, I wished that I could help financially or physically. Even though I grew up in a stable and supportive environment, I'm still disabled and honestly barely getting by financially since I don't rely on my parents anymore. The fact that I can't help others in the way that they truly need deeply pains me. The best I can do is be a listening ear and validate my friends and encourage them, but it would always feel kind of helpless, like patting someone on the back while they continue to be But things have gotten better. Since I first started writing the script for this video, I got lucky enough to get a fairly nice apartment earlier this year, thanks to having a roommate whose income helped us just barely qualify for an apartment. My roommate is one of my disabled friends who had been very neglected and had been struggling to survive. They were living in a tiny studio apartment in a very unsafe area. This apartment was literally falling apart, the walls were peeling off, the electricity didn't always work, and there were roaches. When my roommate was living there, their lack of support and the unsafe environment made their functioning even worse. They could barely take care of themselves or feed themselves properly, and the best they could do was just play video games and watch videos to distract themselves. So honestly, getting this apartment was like a huge sigh of relief, not only for me, but also for my roommate. At the same time, two of our disabled friends who were also in terrible situations were able to move into my roommate's old apartment, which, believe it or not, was a step up from their previous circumstances. So at least for now, they have a safer place to stay until they can get better accommodations. So it kind of feels like things are starting to look up, and I feel happy that in a way that I could do something to help my friends and myself. And I'm honestly still shocked that I managed to find housing that I actually qualify for. And my friends living in my roommate's old apartment are happy that they can finally be together and that they are safe. I'm keeping them anonymous in this video, but I wanted to share this story because disabled people like us often face seemingly hopeless circumstances, but this gives me hope for the future. When I was looking for housing, I envisioned a sort of living community for neurodivergent and disabled people, owned and run by neurodivergent and disabled people. Like, we would buy land and build on it, or buy a whole apartment building and make it affordable to live in. It would be like a safe community where we'd help each other out, since obviously a lot of us just aren't getting the help that we need. I thought of this idea when I noticed that my roommate and I function much better together than we ever did apart. We make up for each other's weaknesses, whether that be physical or mental. My concept for a neurodivergent living community is sort of like that, but on a bigger scale. Although we'd probably still need proper care staff. It's a pretty big dream that would likely be expensive and definitely way beyond my means, but thinking about that as a possibility for the future makes me honestly feel a little bit less helpless about the collective circumstances that disabled people often deal with. So all of this being said, all of the downsides of being on disability benefits, I just wouldn't be able to survive without them. Without question, I would recommend SSI or SSDI to anyone at my level of functioning or lower. So if you're disabled and without support and you can't work at all, or like me, you can only work just a very little bit, like 4 to 12 hours a week, honestly, you really should be on disability benefits. When compared to trying to work full-time with a debilitating health condition, dealing with the annoying parts of being on SSI is honestly much more manageable. Yes, it probably will stress you the heck out, and it will restrict your life in some ways, but it's honestly better than being homeless or having your lifespan cut short due to forcing yourself to work. I've seen way too many people who are very disabled trying to survive under capitalism without any support, and it's honestly not pretty. Trust me when I say that applying for disability benefits when you truly need them will be worth it in the end. Get a disability attorney to help you. That's what they're there for. I provided some links to disability attorneys in the video's description. Check those out if you're looking to apply for disability benefits for yourself or for a loved one. Okay, now this is the part where I talk about ABLE accounts. I mentioned this earlier as a potential resource for people on SSI, as well as people looking to apply for SSI. An ABLE account is a tax-advantaged savings account that allows people with disabilities to save more than $2,000 without any negative impacts to their benefits. SSI beneficiaries can save up to $100,000 total and $15,000 per year before it starts to impact benefits. These funds must be used for disability-related expenses, but these expenses are defined loosely enough that you can use them for a wide variety of things. According to the ABLE National Resource Center, these may include education, food, housing, transportation, employment training and support, assistive technology, personal support services, healthcare expenses, financial management and administrative services, and other expenses which can help improve health, independence, and/or quality of life. You can also receive direct support from friends or family to your ABLE account through a bank transfer or to a check made out to your ABLE account. But the options for receiving funds depends on the state. Each state has their own ABLE program with their own rules, so be sure to do your research when signing up for an ABLE account. As mentioned earlier, food stamps and Medicaid are a great resource if you need support in addition to disability benefits, or while you're in the process of applying for benefits. But once you do have benefits, particularly SSDI, you may qualify for Medicare. Both Medicaid and Medicare are types of health insurance, but they have differences. Medicaid is for US residents considered low income, while Medicare is for disabled people and seniors.
If you're a non-elderly disabled adult, you must be on SSDI to qualify for Medicare.
The reason I mention Medicare is that it can greatly expand your health coverage when combined with Medicaid. You can apply for something called a Medicare Advantage plan, or a similar plan for those on both Medicare and Medicaid. Some of these plans can help pull disabled people even further out of poverty by offering a wide variety of medical coverage with no copays, and in some cases may offer a monthly allotment for healthy food and over-the-counter medical supplies. From experience, having this extra resource has been a crucial safety net to help me fully cover my needs, and to help cover the basics for when I'm between coverage, like if I'm wrongly denied for food stamps and have to spend a month or two without them during the appeal process. So when it comes to disabled people living in poverty, what can we do? Here are some systemic solutions that can be implemented. Back in 2021, a bill called the SSI Restoration Act was proposed to help people on SSI. This bill would increase the 2000 savings cap up to $10,000, and it would disregard income up to the first $544 a month before applying any deductions. It would also eliminate the marriage penalty, and it would not count in-kind support as income. It would also increase the maximum SSI benefit to 100% of the poverty level, which as of 2023 is $1,215 a month. If someone were to have asked me what needs improving about the SSI program, honestly, this would be it. I have been hoping for these exact changes long before the SSI Restoration Act was proposed, and it's honestly not just me. Many others have been echoing the same desire for many years. The fact that a bill like this has even been introduced is promising, but one glaring issue is the fact that 2.5 years have passed without any updates. I did hear that they tried splitting up parts of the bill into separate bills, like the Savings Penalty Elimination Act, but no news yet on whether any of these have passed. If you have any information about what's going on, please share it in the comments. I would love to know.
A note from me from the future, there has been one positive update, and that's that food is no longer considered as in-kind support. Don't quote me on that though, I don't know all the details, so for more information on this, check out the links in the description.
Also, if you are a politician or an influential person or in any position of power that could help put any part of the SSI Restoration Act back on the table, please lend any help that you can. Or if you have a platform, talk about this issue, bring awareness, or share this video. See, little share button right down there. You gotta click it, and then you gotta copy the link, and then you gotta put it in your social media, and then you click the share button, and then you send an email. Do people even email anymore? Send it in a text. Recite the link in Call of Duty lobbies. Do whatever you have to do. The SSI program has sadly been neglected for 50 years and badly needs updating. This is a matter of life and death for over 7 million disabled and elderly Americans who rely on these benefits to survive. I believe we could go even further in improving government programs beyond just SSI. A whopping 66 million Americans also rely on Social Security Disability, or SSDI, benefits to keep them afloat. And while the rules for SSI are more strict, some of the rules around SSDI are still outdated and could use some improvements along SSI. Also consider Medicaid, which helps 91 million low-income and disabled Americans access life-saving medical care. The income cap for this program is abysmally low at $914 a month, making it way too easy to lose the safety net if you even try to improve your financial circumstances. There is an enormous health coverage gap between impoverished people on Medicaid and the upper middle class people who can actually afford standard health insurance. The moment you start making more than $914 a month, you'd become more impoverished than you were before, especially if you're disabled, as your healthcare costs could be an average of $20,000 per year as a disabled person. That would be impossible to pay if you're under the poverty line. I mean, SSI just by itself is only like $10,000 a year. You would be in the negative. You would be in debt from medical bills. But you know, this is America. Isn't everyone in debt
From medical bills.
Luckily, the SNAP program, also known as EBT benefits or food stamps, is a little bit more lenient, but it does require non-disabled recipients to work about 30 hours a week, which can be problematic due to how the government defines disabled. In the SNAP program, you are not considered disabled unless you're receiving disability benefits or SSI, which, as we have already established, is extremely difficult to get approved for. So if you're disabled and not on benefits and you can't meet the work requirements, the government apparently thinks that you don't deserve to eat. This is a problem. I think the higher-ups making the decisions on these programs are a little bit out of touch with the millions of impoverished Americans who rely on these supports to live. Wealthy people in positions of power might take their comfortable lives for granted, not knowing how difficult it really is to survive in our broken economy for the average person, let alone low-income and disabled people who literally cannot pull themselves up by their bootstraps. I would honestly like to see these higher-ups try living off of government benefits for a year, starting from scratch, no housing, without access to any of their wealth or influence or safety nets. It would be probably a wake-up call, at least hopefully, for them to make some positive changes to the government programs to reduce the needless suffering, as well as the victim blaming.
The victim blaming is also a problem.
So we already know that politicians who oversee these programs have the potential to make a huge amount of difference, but what about average people like you and me who likely don't have a lot of individual power? While one person's actions alone might not make a huge difference, if we can just spread this knowledge to others, it could have a ripple effect that could eventually reach people with more power to change things. I recommend either sharing this video or talking about this issue with others, or make your own video on this topic. If you're a disabled person on government benefits, share your story on social media or even in the comments of this video. You could also vote for politicians who support bills like the SSI Restoration Act and call your local representatives about supporting bills like this. I've also included some links in the description where you can send messages to representatives about this issue if you'd rather not make any phone calls. Ask them for their support for programs that disabled people rely on. Also, help disabled people in your life wherever you can. Ask what they need rather than blindly sending support like cash gifts that could negatively impact their benefits. And don't send them anything that they don't need. We might need assistance with something like a phone call or a household chore that we struggle with, or a ride to a medical appointment. We might need direction to supports that exist that we might not be aware of. We may just need a friend to spend time with, or to be a listening ear, or someone to just take us out to McDonald's for some fries and ice cream, or whatever our favorite snacks are, or a trip to a place that we like. Being disabled can be incredibly isolating and overwhelming, and sometimes even the smallest gestures can be incredibly meaningful, provided that we consent to them. So please be sure to always ask first. In conclusion, this topic is frankly exhausting to talk about since I live it every day, so there is a good chance that I didn't cover it perfectly. Comment below if I left something out, or if I got something wrong, or if you honestly just want to share your experience of being on disability benefits. We need to hear more stories from people who are actually dealing with this stuff. I also included a link to the script for this video if you would like to read it or share it in article form. Thanks for watching! 500. God, my damn. Blooper. Okay. The SSA doesn't count the first $85 that you make in a month as income. Okay. And I'm not the only one dealing with this. I found a Reddit Fred. Who's Fred? Who's Reddit Fred? Who's Fred on Reddit? Oh my god, here's a blooper. So if you're disabled and not on benefits and you cannot meet the work requirements, then the government apparently doesn't deserve to, the government doesn't deserve to eat. The government doesn't deserve to eat unless you get your freaking medical care and benefit, food benefit. Oh, help. Not knowing how difficult it really is to survive in our broken hominy, golden hominy. The finger is freaking, my finger isn't doing this in real life, I swear. Okay.